Hi, let's talk about jQuery data and user input. So we're going to look at the data attribute and how to get and set values for data attributes, and also how to get and set values from user input fields. First, let's take a look at getting and setting data. So in HTML5, we have the data attribute that allows us to tag elements with our own unique custom data attribute names. So here you can see we have an unordered list with the ID of user list, and inside of it we have all of these list items. So you can see here that I've gone ahead and given this two different data attributes, and we always start off using the word data and then a hyphen. And then following that, you can really fill in whatever name you'd like to give the attribute. So this one's called data-user-id. So the part that I've made up myself here is this part, the user-id part. Okay, so it's up to you to come up with this part. But again, the data dash part is strictly has to start off with data dash. Okay, so I created another one here called data dash online. Okay, so these are perfectly valid attributes in HTML5. And the nice thing about this is I can pass in information here. So for example, I've given each list item a different user ID here. So here in these list items, I have the names Bob, Joe, and Tom, and those can correspond to a user ID. So Bob has a user ID of 1, Joe has a user ID of 2, and Tom has a user ID of 3. And I've also filled in the information whether they're online or not. So here I'm saying that it's true that Bob is online, it's false that Joe is online, so Joe's actually offline currently, and Tom's online is set to true. Okay, so the nice thing about setting these data attributes is we can store this information somewhere, and this information won't be visible in the browser. So when a viewer looks at this in the browser, when it's actually rendered as a web page, they'll actually see the list items with the names Bob, Joe, and Tom. But hidden behind the scenes, unless they actually browse the source code of that HTML file, they're not going to see these data attributes holding numbers and Boolean values. So these values are pretty flexible in that, we can either insert these guys into here from a remote server somewhere else in the world. Okay, so the server can use some database information, and as it's sending this HTML page to the browser, it could already have these values filled in here. Okay, and then we can detect these values using JavaScript, and we can then based on that make decisions, right? Okay, so for example, if the data dash online attribute is set to true, maybe we could make the text green or something like that. We could add a class to make the text green for people who are online, and then maybe red for people who are offline, like Joe. Now, in addition to being able to manipulate these values or set these values server side, we can also do it client side using JavaScript as well. So JavaScript gives us the ability to both get and set these values. Let's take a look at getting these values. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the unordered list with the ID of user list. So that'll select this guy here. And then we're going to go inside and find all the list items. Okay, and then we're using the each method, meaning that for each one we're going to do the same thing. So it's going to actually loop over each of these list items. And what we're going to do is we're going to print to the console the information that's inside of the data attributes. So the way we do that is we're saying $this. We're selecting this, which in the case of this each loop represents each individual list item. So the first time this represents the selection of this list item here. So for this list item, we're going to use the jQuery data method by saying .data. And then for the first argument here, we're going to pass in the unique part of the data attribute. So notice that when I say .data, I only have to specify the name of the data attribute after the hyphen. So we don't have to write data dash user ID. We can simply write user ID inside of a string here, and it's going to find this data attribute and it's going to grab the value. Okay, so here for user ID, it's going to grab the value 1 the first time, and then the second time it loops, it's going to grab the value 2 out of the user ID attribute, and the third time it's going to grab the value 3 out of the third list items user ID attribute. So again, we simply say .data, and then we just give the name of the data attribute we're looking for. Okay. Now, if we wanted to get the value of the online status, instead we can say .data and pass in the string online. So again, everything after this first hyphen, we can leave out the data dash here. Whenever we use the data method, it's assumed that we're looking for an attribute that starts off with data dash. So then we just pass in the string online, and here the first time it loops, it will give us the value of true, the second time false, and the third time true again for Tom. So again, using a single argument here allows us to get the value of the matching data attribute. Now, in addition to getting, we can also set values using the data method. So here we start off by selecting a list item that has a data-user ID attribute that matches 2. So this time we're selecting specifically just this second list item here. Okay. And then we're calling the data method on it, and we are going to look for the data attribute of online. So it's going to go ahead and find this one here. So previously we just had a single argument here, and now we've provided a second argument of true, and that's going to actually set the value of this data attribute. So here it's going to set this from false to true now. So just to look at that one more time, if we have a single argument, then we're going to get the data for the attribute specified. And if there's 2 arguments, the second argument will set the value of the data attribute specified. So here we're selecting the data-online attribute, and we're setting it to true. Now we can also clear data settings simply by passing an empty string. So here if we said data online, we're looking for the data-online attribute in the element with the ID of foo, and we're setting its value here to an empty string. So this would actually clear out the data-online attribute's value.